Hi everyone, Chris from Stone Age Gamer here, and welcome back to the gratuitous Rainbow Spectrum. This is Blaster Master. It's one of my very favorite games of all time. This is Blaster Master 2, a game that very few people even know exists. Blaster Master was a pretty big success here in the United States, and it's got an entire lineage of sequels that very few people have ever heard of, let alone played. So in this wacky world filled with amazing game compilations like the Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection and the upcoming Atari 50, I gotta ask, where the heck is my Blaster Master collection? Retro video game collections have been running on full steam lately, and they've never been of better quality than they are now. From the excellent efforts from folks like Digital Eclipse, like the Cowabunga Collection and the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection, to in-house stuff like Konami's Castlevania Collection, and even a few things that I would call of questionable nature, like the stuff coming out of Inin Games and Strictly Limited has been pretty solid, like the recently released Turrican Anthology series. Retro compilations are riding high, and there's never been a better time for whatever is left of Sunsoft to get players in front of the entire Blaster Master saga in its original form. Blaster Master was released in 1988 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and is a pretty interesting localization of a Famicom title called Cho Wakusei Senki Metafight. Sorry for the pronunciation. Metafight was a pretty straightforward sci-fi story about space and planets and blowing stuff up, but when Sunsoft brought it to the US, they added a legendarily bizarre story. Blaster Master is about a boy named Jason whose pet frog Fred found a gigantic crate of radioactive waste in their backyard. The frog mutated to enormous size, fell down a hole, and naturally Jason threw all caution to the wind and jumped down after him. At the bottom was a tank and a battlesuit, and Jason decided to go on a murderous rampage to find and save his pet frog. It's completely insane, but it was quite memorable, as was the rest of the game. And playing out like an early search action game, it looked and sounded leagues above most of what else was on the NES at the time, and became a pretty decent success, at least in the US. Metafight didn't do much of anything in Japan, which was pretty unfortunate because Blaster Master is a true classic, and shows off what Sunsoft was truly capable of doing on the platform. The first game has been re-released dozens of times, and is currently available as part of Nintendo Switch Online, but other modern platforms aren't so lucky, and as one of the best games of its generation, it deserves to be played by everyone. The next game in the series that came out was Blaster Master Boy, or Blaster Master Jr. This one's weird because it's kind of only a Blaster Master game in name. This actually is a localization of Bomber King Scenario 2, which itself is a spin-off from the Bomberman franchise. Bomberman wasn't exactly an unknown quantity in the US, so it kind of boggles the mind as to why exactly they felt it needed to be a Blaster Master game, but hey, stranger things have happened. As for the game itself, it really only resembles half of what made Blaster Master special. The original game was made extra cool because of the player's ability to jump out of their tank and play as Jason on foot at any time. Doing this allowed access to entire areas of the game that your tank can't fit in, which also changed up the way the game is played entirely. The perspective shifts to a top view, and you can run and gun and drop grenades while searching for the area boss. Bomber King sort of resembles these overhead segments, and as such, Blaster Master Boy plays out like an entire game of Blaster Master without the tank. Not sure where the rights on this ultimately land, but I can't imagine if someone were to make a Blaster Master collection that this one would be hard to acquire. As you may have guessed, Blaster Master Boy has never been re-released in any form on any platform. It's not amazing, but it's pretty cool and carries on the Blaster Master tradition of truly excellent music. Then in 1993, Blaster Master got its first true sequel in the form of Blaster Master 2. Oddly enough, after the first two games being exclusive on Nintendo platforms, Blaster Master 2 showed up as a Sega Genesis exclusive, and what's more, it only ever released in North America. Blaster Master 2 is an interesting game. It was developed by Software Creations instead of Sunsoft themselves, and it's really quite an ambitious title. It tried to take everything the original game did and bring it up to the next level, and it did an admirable job, if not a completely successful one. The overworld now features inclines and the ability to lock your tank's gun in place. Instead of shifting to an overhead perspective in the Jason segments, these now play out as boss areas with a side-scrolling perspective. That doesn't mean the overhead segments are gone entirely. Now these areas are played through as your tank. They're pretty neat, except for the fact that the controls are completely bananas, making these sections troublingly unwieldy. Overall, Blaster Master 2 fails to live up to the first game's legacy, but it doesn't fail outright as a game. It's still exploratory, you still upgrade your tank, and the music still rules, even if it can be a little abrasive at times. As of today, Blaster Master 2 has never been re-released in any form on any platform, which is a darn shame if you ask me. It was about 7 years before we saw Blaster Master again, but when we did, we were spoiled for choice. 2000 saw the release of Blaster Master Enemy Below for Game Boy Color, and Blaster Master Blasting Again for PlayStation less than a year later. Enemy Below is more or less a retread of the first game. Almost all of its assets are pulled directly from the original NES game, which all of its areas are based on as well. Jason's sprite in the overhead segments has been overhauled though, as was the way his weapons worked, especially the grenades. It does feature all new bosses and a handful of new enemies, but it feels like a hollow imitation of its NES counterpart in a lot of ways. And the physics of your tank are off, and movement in the overhead segments feels sluggish too, even by Game Boy Color standards. It's not a bad game by any stretch, but its lack of originality holds it back. The music is pretty hollow sounding too. This one was re-released on the 3DS Virtual Console, but since that's closing down soon, that release isn't exactly of a whole lot of value today. Meanwhile, similar to Blaster Master 2, Blaster Master Blasting Again for PlayStation was a bit more ambitious than the developers could properly pull off, but darn if this game doesn't try its best. This was developed in-house at Sunsoft and saw the company try to make a proper 3D Blaster Master game. And they nearly succeeded too. Blasting Again tried to make the visuals appear a bit more realistically proportioned and detailed, which helped lend to making the transition to 3D a little bit more believable. Your tank can still jump, but everything seemed more mechanical this time around. There was voice acting, a story that didn't involve a frog, and ties to the entire series' mythology up to that point, including the FX9 Blaster Master Worlds of Power novelization. Unfortunately, this game's ambition was probably a little high for the humble PlayStation, and while it's kind of fun and features even more excellent music, it ultimately doesn't really work. Controlling the tank never feels as good as you want it to, and the same goes for Jason. That doesn't mean it's a bad game though, quite the contrary. There's a lot to enjoy here, and it deserves to be played by more people. The original release, at least here in the US, went straight into bargain bins as a value title, and never got much press, so it really just came and went with little to no fanfare. It's also never been re-released on any platforms as far as I know. Another decade passed without any new Blaster Master content until 2010, when Sunsoft released out of absolutely nowhere Blaster Master Overdrive for WiiWare. And when I say out of nowhere, I mean that. There was a trailer released, and then a few days later the game dropped on WiiWare. Now, WiiWare wasn't exactly a platform known for its huge sales numbers, but even by WiiWare standards, I'm pretty sure this game flopped hard. Which is again a bit of a shame because there's some pretty cool stuff in there. Unlike the other Blaster Master games, Overdrive is positioned as a reboot with an all-new story. The music is almost entirely pulled from the NES game though, and has been redone with varying degrees of quality. Some of it's cool, while other songs are a notable step down. The game itself does some really cool things. There's a new grapple wire power-up that makes traversing more interesting, and your vehicle's weight has been altered to feel more tank-like. It's still pretty agile, but it feels heavier than previous entries. The overhead segments also play pretty well, with some neat weapons and a refined ability to strafe. The biggest problem is that the environments are all really samey. While the original games all took you through incredibly diverse locations, this one is just a series of different colored caves. It's not ugly per se, but it's not exactly impressive. Not only has this game never been re-released in any form, but the Wii Shop channel has been closed for quite some time now, meaning that because there was never a physical edition, there is currently no legal way to buy this game.
So what exactly is the holdup with a Blaster Master collection? I have to guess it's a lack of interest because, I mean, I don't know, I don't hear a lot of people talking about the classic Blaster Master sequels besides myself, and I tend to not shut up about them. Maybe it's because of the rights issues. Maybe Blaster Master 2 is Sunsoft kind of forgot it exists because it was only released in America. Or maybe it's the Blaster Master Junior/Boy situation with Hudson and Bomberman. I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I do know that I want a Blaster Master collection, and I'd like to think I'm not alone in the world. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked what you saw here today, please follow, comment, like, subscribe, share around, tell all your friends, and by all means, get down in the comments and let us know what you think of Blaster Master games. Would you buy a Blaster Master collection? Do you want to know all about the crazy artwork and stuff that's never been released before, and the kinds of things that get uncovered when new companies make these amazing collections? Because I know that I would, and I'd love to hear people kind of reinforce that I'm not alone. Thanks again for watching, everybody. On behalf of all of us here at Stone Age Gamer, keep playing games.